welcome to my priest guide. This first part I want to go over the talents quickly, which I recommend, and there is a little change, that's why I re-update or re-record this video. And this is the build I recommend. Discipline priest is basically meta and required in most groups, at least random groups. The reason for that is that the main rates are Eco 40 and Nax, and the power infusion stacks very well with the ignite mechanic of the mages, and therefore this is a very vital and essential trait. In addition, the holy, the idea of holy is kind of the spirit priest and spirit based build, which stacks very well with world buffs. However, you don't really need the more heal output, it's just simply not required. There are very few encounters which actually need a high heal output, like Sapphiron, but that's basically it, like Sapphiron and the second boss in BVL, and BVL is just simply not a thing. We're talking about era vanilla, of course. So I want to go over the traits, and this is the build I recommend. The advantage of this build is that you can do everything. You can play PvE, you can play PvP, you can do DPS for farming, and yeah, this is very strong. You don't lose anything in PvE healing, raid healing. It is not as good in 1 vs 1 PvP as Shadow, but that's the only thing where Shadow is better. Actually, in everything else, this build is better, even in doing damage. Now, obviously, one short remark to Shadow Priest is that it's simply not viable because you don't need Shadow Weaving anymore in current era meta, because you at maximum have 2 Warlocks, so there's no Curse of Shadows and it on the bosses, and then why you would need Shadow Weaving in addition. So it's just not needed, and the Warlocks use fire spells, so they play how it's called. I forgot. They play the fire build. This short remark to why Shadow is not viable. Even if you would want this buff, you could play Disci, and instead of 19 points here, going 31 and 20 points in Shadow to get this. However, this was a neat private server at the end of private server time build, but it's just simply also not necessary because you don't need this Shadow Weaving buff anymore in the current meta. So this is the best build you can have in the current meta. The idea of this build is that you go Force of Will, which gives you 5% crit for offensive spells, and you get Holy Specialization 5, so you have 10% crit on your offensive spells via this build, and also you get 5% damage increase. Notice that you kind of lose a bit of damage because you don't have Spiritual Guidance, but you go with Searing Light, and this is actually a very good compensation. And if you equip damage gear, that makes it very, very strong. For example, I have the Shadow Farm gear. I will go over the gear in a different video. And actually, the next shows how strong this is via farm for farming demonic runes, which is mandatory. Yeah? So let's go over the traits. I prefer one specialization over Unbreakable Will, especially if you would be Dwarf, which is the best race for Alliance. Then you don't need Unbreakable Will at all. It gives you some advantage in PvP. You could argue maybe putting that 1 point of resolve in Unbreakable Will. But I prefer one specialization, especially on Alliance side, because the Paladins might judge. It's very rare scenario, so, and both talents are not very strong. This, of course, would be very strong for Onyxia if that would be a thing, which it's not. But on a fresh server, maybe that is a thing. Oh, these, of course, mandatory are the buffs talents, because every priest should bring them, so buffing becomes easier and quicker, because this is very important. Because otherwise buffing takes a lot of time, so every priest have to have it. Buffing 3 points in Power Word Shield, it's not such a strong talent. However, you have to see that Power Word Shield doesn't get only 10% bonus from your add heal. So buffing its base healing by 15% is actually more relevant than, for example, this trait. So it's not that weak, and Power Word Shield matters only in the scenarios of Mortal Strikes. And also to give it to your mages, but then you don't need this talent. You give it to the mages so to stop pushback. Actually, maybe this talent even helps for that, because it keeps the shield longer on. So this there's no real alternative to these talents. As I said, you can put this point there. And then these points are mandatory. Meditation is of course one of the strongest talent. It does stack with your 3T2. So if you have 3T2, you have 30%. It does stack with the Dark Moon Trinket. So if that procs, you have 115% of your mana generation. And a focus, this is a kind of out-of-date talent because you don't really need it anymore. The strength of this talent was that you can easily get out or you can get out of the 5-second rule, so that your full spirit rack cashes in one time. Yeah. So if you see, you have here mana rack while not casting. And if I go into a relevant set, let's say 82. Then you see that it's much more. It's like 250 while not casting. While casting, it's only 95. And if you don't cast for 5 seconds, then it goes to you get 1 tick of the 250. And a spell which costs no mana doesn't count as casting. So that's why if you cast if you activate this and you cast a greater heal, which is 2.5 seconds because of this talent, then it doesn't count. So you have 2.5 seconds, which already doesn't count, and then you cast your next greater heal spell, which also takes 2.5 seconds, and then when it resolves, you get 1 tick out of the mana rack while not casting, so 250 mana back. This is the mechanic of Inner Focus. It obviously increases also your crit chance by 25%, which is a nice bonus, but yeah, for offensive reasons and PvP, that is something you should keep in mind, but otherwise it's not really relevant. Mental Agility, this trait is for dispelling, making the dispels cheaper. This is also increase the maximum mana. This stacks, by the way, with Flask, etc. So this is pretty neat talent. Good for speedruns, because there it's all about mana. Yeah, so this is obviously is required, so you have to have it to get power infusion, which is the main draw of build. This I have already explained. Improved renew, this is basically just to make sure that other priests cannot override your renew. The buff of the base heal is not so relevant, but first, in the first video I recommend putting 1 point here and 2 point here, but you can do that, but it's just not, yeah, because this is very strong with a build. I will go in another guide if you go with 2.5, which is basically a renew build guide, build, yeah, where you go to T3 and 2.5, and I will explain that. It has some scenarios. Now this is mandatory inspiration. Holy Nova, a very underestimated and strong spell, because it's group healing without suffering from pushback. It is of course very narrow, so you have to be around him, but in next there's a lot of situations where this is very helpful, and especially it heals a lot and also does DPS, makes the raid quicker. PvP wise, it's of course to undetect the rogues. Then we have the core idea of the Searing Light of this build, which I already explained. So this is the build, and this is the part 1. Thanks for watching.